Last week, the province's Civilian Police Oversight Agency, the Office of the Independent Police Review Director, offered a stark assessment of the Thunder Bay Police Service and its relationship with Indigenous communities. The report cited an institutional problem of systemic racism, resulting in significant deficiencies in the investigations into the deaths of Indigenous people in that city. Jon Thompson is our Ontario Hubs editor covering the northwestern part of the province. He's been watching this all closely, and he joins us now from Thunder Bay. Hi, Jon.
Hi, Nam.
What has been the significance of this past week in Thunder Bay?
I have never in my career seen something that's so deeply affected a breadth of the population. There isn't anybody who is not affected by the events of the last 2 weeks. This is a culmination of what has been happening in Thunder Bay for decades, and the release of the OIPRD and OCPC reports and the reaction to them, the effects of that are going to be felt for decades.
Well, let's talk about the reports. The first report that was released, I believe, on Wednesday, the OIPRD report, is the result of a 2-year investigation. What prompted this investigation in the first place?
I was on a railway bridge on the morning when Stacey Debungy's body was found in the Nebing-McIntyre floodway that passes through the middle of Thunder Bay. Debungy's case was deemed by the Thunder Bay Police Service as a not suspicious death within 24 hours before any sort of autopsy was done. Rainy River First Nations then hired an investigator and produced a CBC documentary entitled No Foul Play that showed that it was possible that there were very severe oversight problems with the police in dealing with that investigation into Debungy's death. That prompted the OIPRD to look into this broader question of systemic racism in the Thunder Bay Police Service.
Well, let's see what the Ontario Police watchdog, Jerry McNeely, said in his report. In the report, he says, the failure to conduct adequate investigations and the premature conclusions drawn in these cases is, at least in part, attributable to racist attitudes and racial stereotyping. Officers repeatedly relied on generalized notions about how Indigenous people likely came to their deaths and acted or refrained from acting based on those notions. I find systemic racism exists in the Thunder Bay Police Service at an institutional level. Those are some pretty heavy words. What are some of the specific examples of systemic racism that the watchdog is referring to?
What Jerry McNeely is looking into is the systems themselves that are designed to protect from and extinguish racism in the Thunder Bay Police Force. He finds those to be lacking throughout. He also finds overt racism in the Thunder Bay Police Force. In one case of an officer, I think he interviewed 36 officers, and in one case, an officer admitted to racial bias. And so there are 44 recommendations in this report, and they cover that question of racism systemically, and they also cover questions of competency within the police service. So it's everything from police wearing body cameras to knowing what the job is of investigators and coroners, because there were questions of police not following up on coroners' reports. There were questions of police not interviewing witnesses, and most damningly, there were questions of police making racial stereotypical assumptions on the deaths of Indigenous people related to alcohol, drinking by the river, and these go back decades.
One of the recommendations in the report is that to open up 9 investigations. Is that correct?
That is correct, and 4 of those investigations are related to an inquest that was held in Thunder Bay in 2015-2016 that looked into 7 First Nations youth who died in the city since 2000, some of whose deaths were undetermined, were inconclusive.
We mentioned that there was two reports that came out. The one came out on Friday, and this one was overseen by Senator Murray Sinclair. And this investigation was on behalf of the Ontario Civilian Police Commission and came out on Friday, as I mentioned. What was the most important development to come out of that report?
On Friday, the OCPC ordered the Thunder Bay Police Services Board to be dissolved for a period of 1 year. There was a lawyer named Thomas Lockwood who will now serve as an administrator that will direct the Thunder Bay Police Service.
In the recommendations that we were talking about before that are coming out of these reports, are any of them binding?
That one is. The board has already been dissolved. Mr. Lockwood is already the administrator of the board. We understand that the OCPC will assume the financial responsibility for that. But the 44 recommendations are just that within the OIPRD report. They are recommendations. They are not binding.
These issues have been raised before, as far back as 1989, when a task force established by the Solicitor General of Ontario heard complaints similar to what we're seeing in these reports. How is this time different?
And that's not the only time. There have been a number of inquests. The Ontario Human Rights Commission has issued a report, and so this is in some ways not new. What this is a report of significance that shows that the voices of Indigenous people in Thunder Bay who have been speaking out for decades on issues that disproportionately impact them have been doing so from a position where the police has been systemically racist.
Well, we have a response from the police. The Thunder Bay Police Service, in part, says is formally acknowledging that it must address the systemic racism barriers and biases that exist within its service. The service has not been standing still, though, while the OIPRD prepared its report. Over the past 2 years, the service has introduced a number of initiatives. What have some of those initiatives been?
Now newly minted Police Chief Sylvie Hoth has taken the last couple of years and has been going to First Nations, participating in ceremony, building relationships in Thunder Bay and across Northwestern Ontario in hopes of developing those relationships in a way that will be culturally sensitive.
Well, you mentioned leadership, and we can't talk about leadership without speaking about the mayor of Thunder Bay, Bill Moreau. He's relatively new. October he was elected. What has been his reaction to this?
Bill Morrow has consistently taken the stand that these sorts of things happen everywhere, that racism exists across Canada, that it exists in different forms, and this is the particular form that it takes here. He had a press conference on Monday morning in which he said that the OCPC dissolving the board was an affront to local democracy. He felt that that he, as mayor, he sits on the police board, and others that are on that board are being, quote, pushed aside.
What's happened recently to maybe cause even a greater division within the community?
In the last 2 weeks, Thunder Bay has just been on boil. There was a video that appears to capture an officer striking a First Nations child while she was in a gurney. And that went viral. And then there was a young man named Braden Jacob who went missing. His body was discovered on a golf course 4 days after he went missing. And so for Thunder Bay, these are stories they have seen far too many times. And so what we really saw over these 2 weeks was a microcosm of what has been happening for the last 2 decades.
With all the findings and the recommendations that have come out of these reports, what are Indigenous people saying that they need?
Well, it's important to say that there isn't a single voice of the Indigenous community in Thunder Bay. First Nations that have issued press releases have all been resoundingly positive about the recommendations of the OIPRD, and grassroots organizations, in many cases, are continuing to do what they do.
I know the reports are very fresh. They just came out last week. But what are the next steps forward for the city?
What people are saying, both Indigenous and non, is that next year really needs to be about healing. In all of these cases, that are known to the nation now, because Thunder Bay has been in the spotlight for well over a year. You cannot look at any of these cases without considering the past trauma that led to those situations. I have been in ceremonies, I've been in pipe ceremonies, I've been in sunrise water ceremonies, I've been in marches and things all week.
We actually have some of that footage of the ways the Indigenous community is coming together to heal.
Well, this is a water ceremony, and it's largely to generate, well, to give thanks for the water and the spirit around hope in this city, and continuing on in this city. It has been a really difficult last couple of years in particular, and I think that there's a sense among some people that this is going to change the way a lot of people in the mainstream particularly were looking at this, and in some ways it might change the points of view of a lot of people who are questioning all the mystery otherwise.
Well, Jon, thank you so much for offering us your insight. You being a part of the community allows us to see what's happening at a local level. We appreciate you spending some time with us on the agenda. Thanks, Jon.
Thanks, Nam.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario, helping businesses stay on the right side of change with strategic thinking, insightful decisions, and business leadership. Are you on the right side of change? Ask an Ontario CPA.